This is where the most interesting people of Kansas come to talk about life and the lessons learned along the way. This week, we welcome a noted author with a bent for equality and social justice and telling stories that make us think. Author Laura Moriarty's genre is fiction, but her stories are driven by reality and a desire to change the world. An associate professor of English at the University of Kansas, Moriarty has written several novels and won numerous awards. She was born in Hawaii in 1970 and later graduated from the University of Kansas. Moriarty earned a degree in social work in 1993, and KU is where she stayed. She earned a master's degree in creative writing and then joined the faculty. When she's not teaching writing, she's writing. Her novels have generated both praise and criticism. Moriarty recently came under fire for her young adult novel titled American Heart. The story depicts an America in which Muslims are rounded up and relocated to internment camps. Its hero is a white teenage girl from Missouri who helps an Iranian immigrant escape to Canada. Some critics considered it insulting, calling it a white savior narrative. We'll ask Moriarty about that and about the experiences that have shaped her writing and her passion to influence the next generation. This should be an interesting half hour, so sit back and get comfy. It's time to go one-on-one with Laura Moriarty right now. Hello and thanks for joining us. I'm Victor Hogstrom. It's a pleasure to welcome novelist Laura Moriarty to the program. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Victor.
You were born in Hawaii.
I was.
Aloha.
Thank you. Thank you.
But you were whisked away as a baby.
Yes.
Military family.
Right. And so
living all over the country.
Exactly.
The question I have is, how did you end up back in Kansas here, and especially at KU?
Well, as you said, we were a military family, and so we lived in Hawaii, Florida, Virginia, Missouri, Utah, and then my dad retired from the Marines, and we moved to Montana. That's where I finished out high school. But then he got restless and wanted to join the workforce again. He started selling tools, got a job down in Kansas, and I came down to Kansas so I could get, I could go out of state but get in-state tuition, and I loved it. I loved Kansas as soon as I got here, and I loved living here.
And been here ever since?
Sort of, in and out, in and out. I've left for a few opportunities a few times, but when I published my first novel and I knew I could live anywhere, I came back to Kansas.
And you received your degrees at KU and stayed, and now
I'm a professor.
A professor at KU. Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
Yes. What were the moments in your childhood, growing up all over America, that really shaped your thinking and led you to this thing called writing?
Oh, I'm trying to think how that specifically did. Well, you know, one thing that would lend itself to writing, and who knows what it is that made me want to write. It could have been just in my genes, it could have been my experience. But some of it was, you know, you move to a new place, you don't know anybody at first, and you sort of have to you have to be your own company, even though I did have sisters, but a lot of times, you know, you're always the new kid. But the other thing is we lived in a lot of different places, and for example, we moved to Ogden, Utah, and most of the people were Mormon, and so I got to experience how it feels to be different from everyone else, to be a minority, to be the one who's a little bit different than everyone else. And it was a good experience. I liked living in Ogden, actually, but you know, you get to feel that as well. So some of those things may have shaped it, but I don't know. I might have wanted to write no matter what.
So when did you discover this talent for writing? At what point in your life?
You know, I never took a creative writing class in high school or even in college. I didn't think I could do it. I always loved telling stories and I love hearing stories. I love that. And I would always, my friends would say, oh, tell that story, and I would sort of ham it up. But it wasn't until I know I applied I entered a contest, a creative writing contest when I was an undergraduate, but I was actually majoring in social work and thinking I was going to go to medical school. That's, how wrong I was. And I did. I won a little award for it, and that felt really good. But I still didn't think of it as a vocation. I didn't think it would be a way that I could make a living. But then later, after I was working as a social worker in Kansas City, I would come home at night and just to sort of process everything I had seen that day, feeling sometimes hopeless and feckless and worried about the people that I was supposed to be working with. I would write about these situations again in a way that, that I could more control as an author, or think about more or linger with more rather than having people just come through in and out. And then I just became more attached to the storytelling and felt certainly more competent at it than I did as a social work. And eventually I applied for graduate school in creative writing and worked at getting better.
So when you begin the writing process, Laura, what images, what revelations, or what disclosures, if any, do you experience?
Oh, wow. I know that a lot of times what I think a story is going to be about is not specifically what it's about. I know that I've got to have some idea of where that character is going, but I don't know precisely, or some things come along the way that surprise me. I can give an example from this book, The Chaperone. This is my fourth novel, and in that novel, I knew it was going to be a little bit about the year is 1922. It starts in Wichita. That this older chaperone who came of age in 1910 is going on a road trip with this young, soon-to-be flapper who's coming of age in a very different era. And I knew there would be these tensions between them. And that was interesting to me. But one thing I didn't know is it's, of course, the younger woman is based on Wichita's screen starlet.
Louise Brooks.
Louise Brooks,
yes.
Exactly. And she, one of her favorite philosophers was Arthur Schopenhauer. Now, I'd never read Arthur Schopenhauer before, but I thought, well, if that was her favorite book, I better read it. And I read the book, and one of his lines, he has a lot of funny lines, but one of his lines is, compassion is the only morality. And that ended up becoming a really important part of the book that I didn't know until I started to write it and research it. And so that's one thing I really love about writing is how much I learn and think as I'm writing.
The Chaperone was set in Wichita, and it is about Louise Brooks, as you've established, except there's one big story behind it. It's being turned into a masterpiece production for PBS.
That's
First,
right.
a movie.
Yes.
Tell us about it. How do you feel about that so early in your career, that something wonderful as this is happening already?
It was so exciting. So I published this book back in 2012, and it did, it made the bestseller list, so that was already very exciting. But then Elizabeth McGovern, who plays Cora Crawley on Downton Abbey, she's won Oscars for her film roles. She read the audiobook and it became a passion project for her. And so she talked to the creator of Downton Abbey, Julian Fellows, and they set about getting this movie to happen. It took them a long time to get the funding and get everything right for it, but I went to the premiere in New York City last week at the Museum of Modern Art, and it was amazing. I love what they did with it. It's slightly different than the book, which I knew it would be because it's a different medium, so it has to be, but it's pretty true to the book, and it's very true in spirit to the book, and the performances were amazing. It was visually, it was beautiful, and it was a thrill to sit in a theater in New York with all these people sort of laughing and waiting and gasping at all the right moments of this work and these characters. I'd imagine it was wonderful.
How did that make you feel seeing the movie that you virtually wrote?
It's exhilarating. It really is, because I think, wow, I wrote that line on my living room couch, you know? And now it's being said by this really talented actor up on a big screen, and people are feeling something from it. And also just to see all these people working hard, these talented people kind of coming together to produce something that's came from this thing that I imagined, it was incredible. But you know, that's always true with writing all the time. It's sort of this delayed gratification because I'm alone when I'm writing, you know, and you spend hours and hours, you're just writing and you don't really have any feedback, and some days are bad, some days don't work. And then, you know, years later you'll get a message, you know, people write me and say what a book meant to them or what a line meant to them. And so it's like you throw this pebble down into a well, but then sometimes you do hear it ping, and it's a wonderful feeling.
Well, I cannot wait to see it come on public broadcasting, public TV, this station.
Yes.
And in case you're watching and waiting for it, it is entitled The Chaperone, and it's with about Louise Brooks. It will be coming to PBS on Masterpiece.
That's right.
So continuing, what is your mission when you sit down to write?
Oh gosh. Well, on a very surface level, it's get the words out, right? Because I know from writing and talking with my students at KU, just staring at that blank page, and you don't want to get too caught up in perfectionism and wanting to get something perfect and never being able to get the idea in your head down, or thinking, oh, that sentence is stupid, this is a stupid way to start. To just write something and get it down, and then you can start to shape it, just like a sculptor would with clay. So on a surface level, it's just to write something, but it's sort of to learn, to think and learn about what I'm writing about. I'm trying to learn as I go, but I'm also trying to capture these images and ideas in my head. I mean, as a writer, I do want to entertain. You know, I want to entertain, but I also want to have people feel what the characters are feeling. Or elicit some response from the reader. It may not be exactly what the characters are feeling, but to, you know, to find out where these characters can interact with the readers. Now, every reader brings something different, so I don't know what that reader will experience, but I want them to feel, and I want them to also just be entertained and wanting to keep turning pages.
Do you see in your mind what you're writing about sometimes, and do you sometimes feel what you're writing about for those characters to feel?
Very much so, very much so. And in fact, I used to like to go and write in coffee shops. Because, well, it's harder to get Wi-Fi, or it used to be, and so I wouldn't, you know,
Right.
But I can't do it because I'm talking to myself, and I'll say dialogue out loud, and I won't realize I'm doing it because I'm sort of in the room and I'm saying it back and forth. I'm sort of thinking because I'm so immersed in the scene.
Right,
and then when something really sad is happening, you know, I am thinking technically, like, okay, what is the best word to put here? Or, you know, it's not this sort of magical experience. I am really thinking about it. At the same time, I can be really moved if I'm thinking about a scene that's, you know, tragic or full of tension. I'm feeling it as well, and trying to sort of create the idea of what I'm thinking about onto the page so the reader can experience it.
Now, you've written a total of published a total of 5 books.
That's right.
One of them we just talked about, the Chaperone.
That's right.
And the other one was American Heart. And in American Heart, and I will quote, it says, the story depicts an America in which Muslims are rounded up and relocated to internment camps. Its hero is a white teenage girl from Missouri who helps an Iranian immigrant escape to Canada. Now, some critics considered it insulting, calling it a white savior narrative. Your reaction?
I would say that most of those critics had not read the book, and in fact made those comments before the book was even available for them to read. I know what this group is ostensibly concerned with, and some of them are, is getting more diverse voices in literature, and I think that's really important. As a teacher, I'm always, you know, trying to bring more diverse authors to my students. I try to read diverse authors as far as ethnicity, background, class, gender, try to read across the experience, because that is really why we read, to try to understand. At the same time, members of this group that were so angry about the idea of the book, not the book itself, because I really, it does not seem to me it would have been possible for them to read it when those comments were made. They think that people can't write outside their identities. And so they were angry that I had written about this. But my response to this would be, I wrote this book during the campaign for the 2016 presidential election. And I was concerned at some of the rhetoric I was hearing, especially against American Muslims. And it reminded me of this book I had read a long time ago called Flawed, which is a nonfiction book where a woman, an American woman, went to interview older German women who would have been young German women, but adults, during from 1933 to 1945, and kind of asked them, what were you doing? Where were you? You know, did you know any Jewish people? What did you think was happening to your neighbors? And you know, you found these sort of evasive answers, or you found some really disturbing answers, some sad answers, but a lot of people said, well, I didn't know any Muslim people. I mean, I didn't know any Jewish people. They weren't in we had our own things to worry about. I didn't know them. They were so wealthy. We didn't have anything, you know, sort of this evasiveness. And then what I was hearing during the presidential campaign, you know, is one, I heard political candidates, and in fact now our president, you know, using imagery like calling people snakes, scorpions, which is very similar to some of the animal imagery that you saw at that time. And then of course we've done this before. We did in fact intern Japanese Americans. So it's possible that this is going to happen. And I would never say that, I read books by Muslim authors and American Muslims, and I teach books by American Muslims. But this was a book that was really about, it was coming from the perspective of a person belonging to the group who was ignorant. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a really important voice to investigate too. I think that's really important, especially with a lot of things happening right now in our country. I think that these voices can work together, and I don't know that it's necessary to stamp out one kind of narrative to lift a different narrative up. I think a bunch of different voices is what matters. And I would also say that you know, Sarah Mary doesn't save Sadaf. She doesn't save her. She realizes she can't. She's just one person. But she also realizes what it means to be a true American. Wow. And that Sadaf, the Muslim woman who she meets and who really becomes not only a heroine to her, but a maternal force, which she very much needs. It's based on Huck Finn. You know, it has a lot to do with Huck Finn. That the novel is much more complicated than this group credit for. Unfortunately, because of the way social media works, they were able to get a review change. So a professional reviewer reviewed the book early on before it came out and read an early version. And she gave it a star and a glowing review. And then when people from this group started to protest it because they assumed it was a white savior novel, they were actually able to change the review, even though the reviewer who wrote it was a Muslim woman. And she liked the book, but I think it's worrisome in this day and age that if anyone finds reason to be offended by anything, that they can get it totally eradicated.
Especially through social media. Especially
through social media, because corporations are so fearful of any kind of blowback. And I mean, if I could go on for a moment, one of the reasons I wanted to write the book, in 2011, there was a wonderful reality show called All American Muslim, and it came out on TLC, and it was kind of this sweet, generic show. You know, it was a family-friendly show, and it followed 5 Muslim families living in Dearborn, Michigan. And, you know, some of their daily lives, you know, like the football team was observing Ramadan, and so they were hungry during practice, you know, and thirsty during practice. Or like another couple wanted to get a dog, but they weren't really sure that, you know, the husband wanted a dog, the wife knew they shouldn't have a dog because they weren't allowed to have the animal in the house, or the dog in the house specifically. And so it was this really great show that allowed people to get to know Muslim Americans other than the sort of the scary boogeyman we see on TV all the time. It was really sweet. Well, an organization called the Florida Family Association was angry because they said it was propaganda, pro-Muslim propaganda, because not one of the Muslims was actually a terrorist. So like, this is crazy, right? And so you could just think, okay, this is just one person getting angry about this extreme view. But in fact, Lowe's was the sponsor for this show, and kayak.com, and they didn't want any controversy, so they pulled support and the show was canceled. And so to me, it seems like this sad bookend of extreme right, extreme left, trying to stamp out anything that offends them or worries them or scares them, and then what we get is silence at a time when we really need conversation and diversity, true diversity.
So in your KU faculty profile, you write, "I like to write about flawed human beings with ordinary lives who are forced by circumstance or their own unquiet minds to reconsider long-held beliefs." What does that mean?
I like to see people slowly change, and it's not like a, you know, the thing I don't want to do is Dickens' Christmas Carol, like, you know, although he changes slowly over that night, he has the three ghosts, you know, and then the next day he's a different person, right? Like, that's too extreme for me, for what I want to do with my writing. But, you know, Cora, she learns that she was so, Cora, I'm sorry, is the heroine of the Chaperone. She's the older Chaperone, and really the novel is about her. So before she goes to New York with Louise, she is sort of, she's used outward projections of morality, such as, you know, wearing the right kind of clothes and being proper and sort of sexual purity, as being her sort of key to survival in a culture, like her way of getting ahead. And she has to, by the end of the summer, really think about morality different as compassion. With Sarah Mary, who's the young heroine of American Heart, she's a bigot. She's a bigot. She's 15 years old when it starts out, and I based it a little bit on Huck Finn, and she has grown up in an America where she's never thought about American Muslims as human beings or what it really means to have freedom of religion. And so she says some pretty horrible things at the beginning of the book, but then when she actually meets someone who challenges those views, she has to slowly think her way out of it, but it doesn't happen all at once. And you know, you take 2 steps forward and 1 step back a lot.
So who's the flawed human being in your mind? Describe one.
Me. All of us, you know?
All of us.
All of us, yeah. I mean, just about. I mean, every now and then you meet someone, then you think, oh my gosh, I think they really are that perfect, right? Like, they're so kind and wonderful and nice. But most of us, you know, struggle, or even if, you know what your flaws are, or sometimes the scales fall from your eyes. We're all on journeys and constantly learning. I know I am. There are things I'd like to improve about myself, just like things I'd like to improve about my writing. And I think that's one of the reasons I like writing so much, is I'm the kind of person, whenever I walk out of an interaction with someone, like I'll walk out of here today, or when I walk out of the room teaching, or after any kind of, you know, argument or even tense discussion with a student, or with my daughter, or with my husband or friend, I'll think 5 minutes later, like, oh, I should have said that. Like, that isn't precisely what I meant. I meant this, and I wish I could back up. With writing, you can. You have this beautiful opportunity to go back and revise and try to think about what it was exactly that you were wanting to say, so you can get a little bit closer to the person you want to be.
So as a fiction writer, describe the perfect hero and describe the perfect villain.
Oh gosh, well, both would be flawed, you know, both would be flawed. I mean, if I think about the perfect hero, I get really bored if I go to a movie, and if it's a romantic comedy or an action, you know, if the heroine in a romantic comedy, if her only flaw is that she's clumsy, I'm gonna get bored pretty fast, right? But if she's got a temper that she's trying to control, or if she is sometimes not as considerate to someone as she should be, or, you know, then it's something like, oh, okay, this is real. This is how real people are flawed, even if they're good people. Like with an action hero, if it's somebody who always has the witty comeback and always does everything right, then I get bored. I know a lot of people like that, but to me, that's just real life. I know that my attention kind of pricks up when somebody has strengths, like they are good at some things, and they are good in a lot of ways, but then they have real flaws in other ways. And the same with villains. Because a villain, you know, a really good villain, they are the hero in their story, and they see it the way they want it. Although with The Chaperone, I will say my whole goal with that novel was to write a story with lots of conflict, but no actual villain. So there's really not a villain in that story. There's one who might be, but even her, I kind of feel sorry for.
So if you are not writing, Laura, what would you prefer to be doing?
I think, Oh gosh, I've asked myself this so many times when I'm sitting at the keyboard and I'm like, I don't know. I think I'd like to be some kind of, maybe a counselor. I think I would like that, I certainly enjoy working with my students when they're writing, but I've never been a counselor day in, day out, so I don't know. I think it'd be fascinating. I wish sometimes I could be a sign language interpreter. I think that would be so interesting to hear language and turn it into a different language that uses hands. For some reason, that's really appealing to me, but I think I missed that boat, but I think it's fascinating.
So what has been or may still be your greatest challenge in life?
To be a better person to the people I love, to be empathetic and not get complacent about my role in life. You meet people or you read about people every now and then who do really amazing things, and sometimes it's a little bit easier to get settled in, and it's easy for me to get settled into my life, and then sometimes I read about things or I meet people who raise the bar for human behavior in general, and I hope to continue to be inspired by that, both in my life and in my writing.
So what are you living for today?
What am I living for?
Mm-hmm.
Oh gosh, at times it's just so much fun, right? I mean, everybody goes through hard times. Everybody has really hard times that, it's not all wonderful. Oh my gosh, my book is being turned into a movie, right? Sometimes the book comes out and people are saying, oh, your book's, offensive and horrible, and we're gonna retract this review. And sometimes you have a great conversation with your child, and sometimes you have a not so great conversation with your child. And, sometimes you're paralyzed with fear about anything. But to me, it is, I try to be aware with what I read of all the people who have suffered before me, right? Like, I think about my grandmother was from Ireland, and she was one of 16 children, and 13 of them died before they reached adulthood. And then her life was cut short. She died before she was even my age, of tuberculosis. And I think about my life and the quality of my life and how quickly the luxury of my life and getting to write and getting to read and having a healthy child and having antibiotics and getting to vote and driving a car, and all the people who were denied that in past generations and people who are currently denied that all over the world. And I do try to revel in my good fortune, and I hope to spread that good fortune as much as I am able to from my little corner.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much,
It's been a pleasure
Victor.
having you, and I enjoyed it.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you having me here.
And thank you for watching this edition of One-on-One. If you have a question or comment, our email address is oneonone@kpts.org. We appreciate your comments. Until next time, I'm Victor Hogstrom. Thanks for watching.